My daughter came home from college with a $3,000 camera her photography professor bought her. Then I found him leaving her dorm at 2 p.m. with her nude photos scattered on her desk, being sold to private collectors for thousands, until she broke down and told me she was pregnant with his baby. And we discovered 14 other girls he'd done the same thing to. During my daughter Zara's freshman year of college, she came home one weekend with a brand new $3,000 camera and professional lighting. This was equipment we could never afford, so her mom and I hounded her for answers. "Oh, Professor Killian bought me this with equipment grants for his new mentorship program," she said with this cheery voice. My wife and I looked at each other and smiled. We were so proud that our daughter was achieving her dream. But then, over the next few weeks, Zara started acting completely differently. She had this new confidence about her. She mentioned these exclusive weekend workshops and private studio sessions with Professor Killian. But what really caught our attention was that Zara, who had always been this casual jeans and t-shirt kind of girl, was suddenly wearing full makeup every day and these expensive tight dresses to classes. She was also staying out way later on weekends, claiming she was working on photography projects, but would get defensive when we asked to see any of her work. I started noticing she had designer handbags and jewelry that cost more than our mortgage payment. She even had thick stacks of cash that she couldn't really explain when we asked about them. During college events, I would casually mention to other parents how well Zara was doing in the photography program. Most parents hadn't heard of any special mentorship programs, but one parent whose daughter Indy had been in the same art program got this strange look on her face and completely changed the subject. When I pressed her about it, she reluctantly told me that Indy had transferred schools suddenly last year for personal reasons. Something about the way she said it made my stomach turn. One Thursday, I decided to surprise Zara with lunch. I drove to her dorm building, and as I was walking up to the entrance, I saw Professor Killian leaving the building. His hair was completely disheveled, and his clothes were wrinkled. He was looking around nervously, like he was worried someone might see him before getting in his car and speeding away. He didn't notice me standing there. I went up to Zara's room and knocked on the door. When she opened it, she was wearing nothing but a silk robe at 2 p.m., and her hair was wet like she had just showered. I could see photos scattered all over her desk, and they were artistic nude shots. I recognized Zara as the subject in every single one. There were also shipping labels addressed to private collectors and invoices showing sales for thousands of dollars. When I confronted Zara about what I had seen, she became incredibly defensive. "It's legitimate art sales, Dad. Professor Killian says collectors pay premium prices for emerging talent like me." She insisted this was completely normal in the art world and that I didn't understand how the industry worked. I contacted Indy's parent and asked her directly what had happened with her daughter. She broke down crying and told me the devastating truth. Professor Killian had been exploiting Indy the exact same way. I knew I needed to help Zara understand she was being exploited and manipulated just like Indy had been. I sat Zara down and presented all the evidence about Indy's situation and Killian targeting vulnerable students. I showed her documentation about other girls who had been targeted and exploited. Zara became even more defensive and insisted her relationship with Killian was different and legitimate. She refused to believe Killian would exploit her the same way he had exploited all these other students. "He cares about my career, Dad. He's helping me build a real portfolio that will launch my professional life." As I showed her more and more evidence, she started breaking down, but still denied the reality of what was happening to her. She was sobbing, but still defending him and insisting I was wrong. Finally, she stormed off to her room and slammed the door so hard it shook the entire house. She was angrily rejecting everything I had told her. Hours passed, and the house was completely silent. I was sitting in the kitchen with my wife, not knowing what our next move should be. We felt completely helpless. Then we heard Zara's bedroom door slowly open. She came out looking completely broken. Her face was red and swollen from hours of crying. She sat down at the kitchen table and could barely look at either of us. She told us that once she was alone, she started really thinking about all the red flags she had been ignoring for months. She went through her phone and reread all of Killian's messages with fresh perspective. She could finally see all the manipulation tactics he had been using on her. She remembered other girls who had suddenly left the program and realized there was a clear pattern of exploitation. "You were right about everything, Dad," she said through tears. "He's been grooming me this whole time and I was too stupid to see it." Then she looked up at us with this expression I will never forget as long as I live. Her face went completely white. "But there's something else, something so much worse." Her voice was shaking uncontrollably. "I'm pregnant, and it's his baby." My wife grabbed my hand so hard I thought she might break my fingers. The three of us sat there in complete silence for what felt like hours, but was probably only a minute. I watched Zara's shoulders shake as she sobbed into her hands. My mind was racing through 1,000 different thoughts at once. How far along was she? Had she been to a doctor? What were we going to do? I stood up and walked around the table to wrap my arms around my daughter. She collapsed against me like she was 5 years old again, crying so hard she could barely breathe. My wife joined us, and we all held each other in the kitchen while the weight of everything crashed down on us. After Zara calmed down enough to speak, she told us she was about 8 weeks along. She had taken 3 home pregnancy tests last week, and they all came back positive. She hadn't told anyone yet, not even Killian. The thought of him made my blood boil, but I pushed down my anger. Zara needed support right now, not rage. We spent the next hour talking through options. Zara was adamant that she wanted to keep the baby despite everything. My wife and I exchanged worried glances, but we both knew this had to be her decision. We promised to support her no matter what she chose. The next morning, I woke up with a plan. I couldn't let Killian get away with what he had done to my daughter, and who knows how many other girls. But I also knew we had to be smart about this. Going to the police or the university would turn into a legal nightmare that could destroy Zara's future. We needed to handle this ourselves. I called Indy's mother and asked if we could meet for coffee. She agreed immediately, sensing the urgency in my voice. When we met at a small cafe cafe downtown, I told her everything. About finding Killian leaving Zara's dorm, about the photos and money, and about the pregnancy. She gripped her coffee cup so tight I thought it might shatter. She told me that Indy had gone through something similar, but had managed to get out before getting pregnant. There were at least 3 other families she knew of with daughters who had been targeted by Killian. We spent 2 hours sharing information and contact details. By the time we left, we had the beginnings of a plan. Over the next few days, I quietly reached out to the other families. Each story was heartbreakingly similar. Young, vulnerable art students desperate for mentorship and validation, expensive gifts and equipment, private sessions that turned inappropriate, photos that were sold without proper consent, and always the same pattern of isolation and manipulation. Meanwhile, at home, Zara was struggling. One minute she would be furious at Killian and ready to expose him. The next minute she would get a text from him and start doubting everything again. He had started love bombing her with messages about how special she was and how their connection was unlike anything he had experienced before. I watched my daughter's phone light up constantly with his messages. He was panicking because she had been avoiding him for days. His texts went from sweet to demanding to angry and back to sweet again. Classic manipulation tactics that I could see clearly, but Zara was still partially under his spell. My wife took time off work to stay home with Zara. We were terrified that if we left her alone, she might go back to him. We disconnected the house phone after he started calling at all hours. He even showed up at our house one evening, but we pretended we weren't home until he finally left. The other families and I continued meeting in secret. We compiled evidence of his pattern of behavior, photos, text messages, financial records showing large cash deposits to the girls' accounts. One father was a web developer who helped us create a secure online folder where we could share information safely. Killian was getting more desperate. He started showing up at places he knew Zara frequented, the grocery store where she worked part-time, her favorite coffee shop, even outside her friend's apartment building. He never approached her directly when others were around, but his presence was a constant threat. One afternoon, while Zara was napping, I went through her laptop looking for more evidence. What I found made me sick. There were hundreds of photos, many far more explicit than what I had seen before. But worse were the contracts she had signed. Killian had convinced her to sign away all rights to her images. He was making thousands of dollars selling her photos, while she got a small percentage. I also found messages between Killian and other collectors. The way they talked about the girls in the photos was disgusting. They weren't interested in art. They were interested in young college girls who could be convinced to pose for increasingly explicit content. Killian was essentially running a pipeline of vulnerable students to these perverts. That evening, I showed Zara what I had found. This time, instead of getting defensive, she got angry. Really angry. The manipulation fog was finally starting to clear. She told us that Killian had been pressuring her to do more and more extreme shoots. When she resisted, he would threaten to drop her from the mentorship program or tell her she wasn't serious about her art. She also revealed that he had been giving her pills before some of the shoots to help her relax. She didn't know what they were, but they made her feel disconnected from her body. The implications of that made me want to drive to his house and handle things myself, but I knew that would only make things worse. The revelation about the pills sent me into a cold fury that I had to physically suppress. My hands were shaking as I processed what my daughter had just told us. Zara noticed my reaction and started crying again, ashamed that she had let things go so far. My wife held her while I paced the kitchen, trying to channel my rage into something productive. That night, I made calls to the other parents. Each family had similar stories about their daughters being given mysterious pills during shoots. One mother, Victoria, was a nurse and immediately recognized the symptoms as consistent with mild sedatives. The pieces were falling into place, painting an even darker picture of Killian's operation. The next morning brought a new crisis. Killian had somehow gotten Zara's new phone number and sent her a barrage of messages. He claimed he had heard about her pregnancy through mutual friends at the college. His texts alternated between declarations of love and subtle threats about what would happen if she tried to ruin his career. He mentioned knowing lawyers who specialized in custody battles and suggested that an unemployed college dropout would never win against an established professor. Zara showed me the messages with trembling hands. The threat about custody had shaken her deeply. She was only 8 weeks pregnant, but already protective of the life growing inside her. Killian knew exactly which buttons to push, and he was pushing them hard. I decided it was time to gather more concrete evidence. Through our network of affected families, I learned that Killian kept detailed records in his campus office. One of the mothers, whose daughter had worked as his teaching assistant before everything went wrong, still had a key card that might work. It was risky, but we needed something more substantial than text messages and testimonies. 3 nights later, I found myself standing outside the arts building at 2 a.m. with 2 other fathers. We had planned this carefully, knowing campus security patterns from our various connections. My heart was pounding as we used the key card, half expecting it to set off alarms, but it worked, and we slipped inside the darkened building. Killian's office was on the 3rd floor. We moved quickly, using small flashlights to navigate. Inside his office, we found exactly what we were looking for. File cabinets full of photos, contracts, and correspondence with buyers. There were folders for at least a dozen girls, including Zara and Indy. Each folder contained progressively explicit photos and detailed notes about how to manipulate each girl based on their vulnerabilities. Zara's folder made me sick. He had written extensive notes about her family's financial situation, her desperation to succeed in photography, and her trusting nature. There were strategies for isolating her from friends and family, gift suggestions to make her feel indebted, and even notes about her menstrual cycle. The level of calculated predation was staggering. We photographed everything we could, careful not to disturb the original files. In his desk drawer, we found a ledger showing his side business had netted him over $200,000 in the past 2 years. He was literally profiting off the exploitation of vulnerable young women while maintaining his respectable respectable professor facade. As we prepared to leave, one of the fathers, Sebastian, noticed something odd. There was a hidden compartment in one of the desk drawers containing USB drives labeled with girls' names and dates. We didn't have time to check their contents, but we photographed their existence and location. The next few days were tense. Killian's behavior was escalating. He had started sending Zara gifts to her home, despite her requests to stop. Expensive maternity clothes arrived with notes about how beautiful she would look carrying his child. A high-end camera showed up with a card suggesting they could document the pregnancy together. Each gift made my daughter more nauseous than her morning sickness. We had to intercept the deliveries before Zara saw them, storing them as evidence. My wife started screening all packages and mail. The stress was taking its toll on all of us. Zara was barely eating, plagued by morning sickness and anxiety. My wife and I were taking turns staying awake at night, worried Killian might escalate beyond gifts and messages. Then came the meeting that changed everything. Victoria, the nurse, had been doing research on the pills Killian had been giving the girls. Through her medical connections, she had identified them as a prescription sedative that, when combined with alcohol, could cause memory gaps and increased suggestibility. The implications were horrifying and potentially criminal. We gathered at my house on a Saturday afternoon, 6 families in total. The living room was packed with parents who had one thing in common, daughters who had been preyed upon by the same man. As we shared our collected evidence, the full scope of Killian's operation became clear. This wasn't just inappropriate relationships with students. This was a calculated system of exploitation. During the meeting, Zara came downstairs to get water and saw the gathered parents. She froze, realizing the magnitude of what was happening. Several of the mothers went to comfort her, sharing their own daughters' stories. For the first time, Zara truly understood she wasn't alone and wasn't at fault. That solidarity seemed to flip a switch in my daughter. The shame and self-blame that had been weighing her down transformed into righteous anger. She went upstairs and returned with a box of her own evidence, printed emails, contracts, and even recorded phone conversations she had made when she started suspecting something was wrong. Among her evidence was something we hadn't expected. Killian had been grooming multiple girls simultaneously, and some of them had been talking to each other. Zara had messages from 2 current students who were in the early stages of his manipulation. They were starting to feel uncomfortable, but hadn't yet realized the full danger they were in. We spent hours organizing everything into a comprehensive timeline. The pattern was clear. Identify vulnerable students, offer mentorship and expensive gifts, gradually introduce photography sessions, escalate to ND shoots with the help of sedatives, profit from selling the images, then use various forms of manipulation to keep the girls silent. As we worked, my phone rang. It was the security company that monitored our house. Someone had tried to break in through the back door while we were all gathered in the front room. We checked the security footage and saw Killian, clearly hammered, attempting to pick a lock before giving up and stumbling away. This escalation changed things. We had been trying to handle this quietly to protect our daughters, but Killian was becoming dangerous. Several of the fathers wanted to confront him directly, but the mothers urged caution. We needed to be smart about this. Over the next week, Killian's attempts to contact Zara intensified. He started showing up at her workplace, forcing her manager to ban him from the premises. He waited outside her friends' apartments. He even tried to enroll in a fitness class she attended, though the gym refused his membership after Zara explained the situation. Each incident was documented, photographed when possible, and added to our growing file. We were building an airtight case, but the stress was overwhelming. Zara had to quit her job because the harassment was affecting her coworkers. She stopped attending classes, afraid of running into him on campus. The pregnancy was progressing, and Zara needed medical care. We found a doctor in a neighboring town to avoid any chance of Killian discovering her appointments. During her first ultrasound, seeing the tiny heartbeat on the screen, Zara broke down completely. The reality of carrying her abuser's child was hitting her full force. That night, she told us she had been reconsidering keeping the baby. The constant harassment and the trauma of everything that had happened was making her question whether she could handle raising a child connected to Killian. We assured her that whatever she decided, we would support her completely. Meanwhile, our group had made a disturbing discovery. Through careful investigation, we found that Killian had done this before at his previous university. He had left suddenly 5 years ago, supposedly for a better position, but we tracked down a former colleague who hinted at a scandal that had been covered up. The pattern went back even further than we had imagined. This information led us to a former student named Vida, who had been one of Killian's first victims. She was now a successful photographer in another state, having rebuilt her life after escaping his manipulation. When we contacted her, she was initially reluctant to revisit that painful time, but eventually agreed to share her story. Vida's experience was chillingly similar, but had an additional element. Killian had actually followed through on his threats when she tried to leave. He had sabotaged her applications to other schools, spread rumors about her mental stability, and even contacted potential employers with slanderous information. This father's midnight break-in with the other parents shows a desperation that breaks my heart. Imagine being driven to commit crimes just to protect your child. It had taken her years to recover professionally and emotionally. Her story terrified Zara, who was already struggling with the decision about her pregnancy. The idea that Killian might haunt her life for years was almost too much to bear. We increased our security measures, installing new cameras and changing our routines to be less predictable. Then, Killian made a critical mistake. In his desperation, he reached out to one of Zara's friends, offering her $5,000 to arrange a meeting. The friend, loyal to Zara, immediately told us about the offer. We realized we could use this to our advantage. Working with the other families, we crafted a plan. The friend would agree to the meeting, but insist it happen in a public place. We would have people positioned nearby to document everything. It was risky, but we needed Killian to incriminate himself further. The meeting was set for a coffee shop near campus. I arrived early with Sebastian and another father, positioning ourselves themselves at different tables with clear sightlines. Victoria and 2 other mothers were outside, ready to intervene if necessary. Zara's friend wore a wire we had purchased online, though we weren't sure about its legal admissibility. Killian arrived looking haggard. He had lost weight, and his usually polished appearance was disheveled. He sat down with the friend and immediately launched into a speech about how Zara was misunderstanding their relationship. He offered the friend an additional $10,000 if she could convince Zara to meet with him privately. As he talked, his desperation became increasingly apparent. He admitted to the friend that he had done this before, but claimed Zara was different, special. He said he had real feelings for her and wanted to be part of the baby's life. Then he made a crucial error, mentioning that he had ways to ensure custody if Zara tried to keep him away from his child. The friend, following our script, asked him to clarify what he meant. Killian, perhaps feeling safe with someone he thought he was bribing, explained that he had connections in family court and documentation that could paint Zara as an unstable young woman who had seduced him. He had been building a false narrative for months, just in case. This revelation was exactly what we needed. Not only was he admitting to planning custody manipulation, but he was also revealing consciousness of guilt. He knew what he had done was wrong and had been preparing his defense from the beginning. After the meeting, we regrouped at my house. The recording was clear, and we had multiple witnesses to corroborate what was said. But we still faced the challenge of what to do with all this evidence. Going to the police remained problematic, as several of the girls didn't want their photos becoming part of public record. That's when one of the mothers, who worked in university administration at a different college, suggested a different approach. Instead of criminal charges, we could present everything to Killian's department chair and the university's Title IX office. With multiple victims and extensive documentation, they would have no choice but to act. We spent the next week preparing our presentation. Everything had to be organized, clear, and irrefutable. We created packets for each victim, showing the pattern of behavior, the financial exploitation, and the escalating harassment. The recording from the coffee shop meeting would be our coup de grace. During this time, Killian must have sensed that something was happening. His messages to Zara became more frantic, oscillating between threats and pleas. He started mentioning Sewer's lied, saying he couldn't live without her. It was emotional manipulation at its most desperate, and it was taking a toll on my daughter. Zara's mental health was deteriorating. The pregnancy hormones combined with the stress were pushing her to her limits. She wasn't sleeping, barely eating, and jumped at every unexpected sound. We found a therapist who specialized in trauma, and she began twice-weekly sessions. In therapy, Zara started processing not just the recent trauma, but the months of manipulation that had preceded it. She began to see how Killian had systematically broken down her boundaries, isolated her from friends, and made her dependent on his approval. The healing process was painful, but necessary. As we finalized our preparations for the university presentation, we received unexpected support. 3 current students had come forward to Zara, sharing their own uncomfortable experiences with Killian. They were in the early stages of his grooming process and had started feeling uneasy about his attention. Our intervention was preventing future victims. These brave young women agreed to add their testimonies to our packet. Their stories showed Killian's current activities, proving this wasn't past behavior, but an ongoing pattern. One of them had screenshots of him offering to buy her expensive equipment in exchange for private modeling sessions. The night before our scheduled meeting with the university, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen, reviewing everything one more time. We had statements from 8 victims, financial records showing over $200,000 in exploitation, evidence of drugging students, recordings of threats and bribery attempts, and documentation of systematic harassment. Zara came downstairs around 3 a.m., unable to sleep either. We sat together in silence for a while before she spoke. She had made a decision about the pregnancy. She wanted to continue with it, not because of any remaining feelings for Killian, but because she refused to let him take anything else from her. If she wanted this baby, she would have it on her terms. I admired my daughter's strength while fearing for her future. Raising a child as a single mother would be challenging enough without the specter of Killian hovering over their lives, but I could see the determination in her eyes. She was reclaiming her agency, making choices for herself rather than in reaction to him. The next morning, our delegation gathered outside the administration building. 6 families, 8 victims who were willing to be present, and folders full of evidence. We had requested a meeting with the department chair, the Title IX coordinator, and a representative from the university's legal department. As we walked into the building, I saw Killian across the quad. He was teaching a class, gesturing animatedly, playing the role of the passionate professor. He had no idea that his carefully constructed world was about to collapse. Part of me wanted him to see us, to know that his victims were no longer powerless, but we had a plan to follow. The meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. We arrived early, taking over a conference room to make our final preparations. The victims who had chosen to attend were nervous but resolute. Zara sat between my wife and me, her hand protectively over her still flat stomach. As the clock approached 10, I thought about everything that had led to this moment. From that first expensive camera to the devastating pregnancy revelation, from the secret meetings with other families to the evidence gathering that had consumed our lives. It had been a journey through hell, but we had survived it together. The door opened and the university officials entered. Their expressions shifted from polite curiosity to shock as they saw the size of our group. The department chair, an older woman named Dr. Patricia Hoffman, took her seat at the head of the table. The Title IX coordinator, a younger man who introduced himself as Marcus Webb, pulled out a notepad. The legal representative, a stern-looking woman in a sharp suit, remained standing. I stood up to begin our presentation, my voice steady despite the churning in my stomach. Thank you for meeting with us. We're here to discuss a pattern of predatory behavior by Professor Killian that has affected multiple students over several years. The room fell silent as I opened the first folder. 8 young women, 8 families, countless pieces of evidence, and one predator who thought he was untouchable. The reckoning was about to begin. I laid out the evidence paced methodically, watching Dr. Hoffman's face grow increasingly pale with each revelation. The photos, the contracts, the financial records showing Killian's exploitation profits. When I played the recording of him attempting to bribe Zara's friend and threatening custody manipulation, Marcus Webb stopped taking notes and just stared. The other parents took turns presenting their daughter's experiences. Victoria explained the medical implications of the sedatives Killian had been administering. Sebastian showed the evidence we'd photographed from Killian's office, including the hidden USB drives and his detailed manipulation notes on each victim. Dr. Hoffman raised her hand to pause our presentation. She excused herself and made a phone call in the hallway. Through the glass door, I could see her gesturing animatedly. When she returned, her expression was grim. She informed us that campus security was being dispatched to locate Professor Killian immediately. The legal representative finally spoke, asking pointed questions about our evidence collection methods. We had anticipated this and explained that everything had been obtained legally, either provided by the victims themselves or discovered through publicly accessible means. The office evidence, we carefully noted, had been photographed by someone with legitimate access to the building. As we continued our presentation, Zara suddenly grabbed my arm. Her face had gone white and she was staring at her phone. Killian had just sent her a message saying he knew about the meeting and was on his way to set the record straight. My protective instincts flared, but Dr. Hoffman was already on her phone again, alerting security about the incoming threat. Minutes later, we heard commotion in the hallway. Through the conference room windows, we could see Killian arguing with two security officers who were blocking his path. Something doesn't add up about Killian knowing about this meeting at the exact moment it was happening. How did he find out? Was someone feeding him information? Or does he have connections inside the administration that nobody's discovered yet? His usual composed demeanor had completely crumbled. He was disheveled, red-faced, and gesticulating wildly. Dr. Hoffman stepped out to speak with security, leaving us in tense silence. Zara was trembling beside me, and I put my arm around her shoulders. The other victims were holding hands, drawing strength from their shared experience. We could hear Killian's raised voice through the door, though his words were muffled. When Dr. Hoffman returned, she brought troubling news. Killian was claiming this was all a conspiracy against him, that the students had seduced him for grades and were now trying to destroy his career. He was demanding to be part of the meeting to defend himself. The legal representative advised against it, citing the safety concerns for the victims present. Instead, Dr. Hoffman proposed that Killian be given the opportunity to respond to the allegations separately after our meeting concluded. This seemed reasonable, though I worried about him having time to craft his defense. Marcus Webb assured us that given the evidence presented, immediate administrative action would be taken regardless of Killian's response. We spent the next hour going through the remaining evidence. The current students who had come forward shared their experiences of Killian's early grooming attempts. Their testimonies were powerful precisely because they showed his methods in the beginning stages, before the full exploitation took hold. Throughout the meeting, Zara remained silent, her hand never leaving her stomach. I knew she was struggling with whether to speak up. Finally, as we were nearing the end of our presentation, she stood. Her voice was quiet but steady as she described her experience, from the initial flattery and gifts to the escalating demands and ultimate betrayal. When she revealed her pregnancy, the room fell completely silent. Dr. Hoffman's expression shifted from professional concern to genuine horror. Marcus Webb set down his pen and rubbed his face with both hands. The legal representative finally sat down, all pretense of detachment gone. Zara continued, describing Killian's recent harassment, the custody threats, and his attempts to maintain control over her. She showed them the messages on her phone, the delivered gifts we had intercepted, and the documentation of his stalking behavior. Her courage in that moment made me prouder than I had ever been. After Zara finished, Dr. Hoffman thanked her for her bravery and assured all the victims that the university would take immediate action. She explained that Killian would be placed on administrative leave effective immediately, pending a full investigation. His access to campus would be revoked, and he would be prohibited from contacting any students. Marcus Webb outlined the support services available to the victims, including counseling, academic accommodations, and legal advocacy. He also mentioned that the university would be conducting a thorough review of the art department's mentorship programs to prevent future exploitation. The legal representative pulled Dr. Hoffman and Marcus Webb aside for a hushed conversation. When they returned, Dr. Hoffman announced that given the evidence of potential criminal activity, particularly the drugging of students, they would be obligated to report the matter to law enforcement. However, she assured us that the victim's privacy would be protected to the fullest extent possible. As the meeting concluded, I felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. We had accomplished what we set out to do, but I knew this was far from over. Killian wouldn't go quietly, and the investigation process would be long and potentially painful for everyone involved. Outside the administration building, our group gathered on the steps. Some of the parents were crying, overwhelmed by the emotional weight of what we had just done. The victims were hugging each other, finding solace in their shared strength. Zara stood apart slightly, looking dazed. We were preparing to leave when campus security approached us. They informed us that Killian had been escorted off campus, but had become increasingly agitated, making threats about lawsuits and ruined lives. They recommended that all the victims consider obtaining restraining orders and offered to provide documentation to support those applications. Over the following days, the university moved with surprising speed. Killian's classes were reassigned to other professors. His office was sealed pending investigation. The art department sent out a carefully worded email to all students, encouraging anyone with concerns about inappropriate faculty behavior to come forward. The response was overwhelming. Within a week, 3 more former students had contacted the university with their own stories about Killian. The pattern went back even further than we had discovered, with incidents dating to his first year at the university. Each new revelation strengthened our case case and validated our decision to act. Killian, predictably, didn't accept his downfall quietly. He hired an aggressive lawyer who sent cease and desist letters to all the families involved. He filed complaints with the university, claiming discrimination and conspiracy. He even started a blog proclaiming his innocence and painting himself as a victim of cancel culture. But his efforts were futile against the mountain of evidence and the united front of his victims. The university's investigation proceeded methodically, interviewing dozens of students and faculty members. Several of Killian's colleagues came forward with their own suspicions and observations they had been too afraid to voice before. During this time, Zara focused on her health and her pregnancy. The stress had taken its toll, and her doctor ordered bed rest. We converted the guest room into a peaceful sanctuary for her, away from the chaos of the ongoing investigation. She spent her days reading, journaling, and slowly beginning to envision a future free from Killian's shadow. One afternoon, while I was working from home to be near Zara, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find a woman I didn't recognize. She introduced herself as Killian's wife, Margaret. My first instinct was to close the door, but something in her expression stopped me. She looked exhausted, defeated, and genuinely remorseful. Margaret explained that she had discovered the truth about her husband's activities. She had found evidence in their home that corroborated everything we had presented to the university. She wanted to apologize to Zara and the other victims, though she understood if we didn't want to hear it. I invited her in, though I remained wary. The conversation that followed was painful, but illuminating. Margaret revealed that she had suspected something for years, but had been in denial. Killian had always explained away the signs, the late nights, the secretive behavior. She had chosen to believe him because the alternative was too horrible to contemplate. When Zara heard Margaret's voice, she came downstairs despite my protests about bed rest. The two women looked at each other for a long moment before Margaret broke down in tears, apologizing profusely. Zara, showing maturity beyond her years, simply nodded and said she understood that Margaret was a victim too, in her own way. Margaret shared that she was filing for divorce and had already moved out of their home. She also revealed something that would prove crucial. Killian had kept detailed records of his photography business on a personal laptop he thought she didn't know about. She had already turned it over to the university investigators. After Margaret left, Zara and I sat in silence for a while. The visit had been emotionally draining, but somehow cathartic. Another piece of Killian's carefully constructed life had crumbled, and his web of deception was unraveling completely. The university's investigation concluded 6 weeks after our initial meeting. The findings were damning. Killian was terminated for cause, with the university citing multiple violations of professional conduct, Title IX regulations, and criminal statutes. They also announced a comprehensive review of all academic departments to prevent similar situations. More importantly for the victims, the university established a fund to provide counseling and support services. They also offered to cover any legal expenses related to obtaining restraining orders or pursuing civil action against Killian. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was acknowledgement and support. Killian's professional life imploded completely. Word spread through academic circles, and his reputation was destroyed. The photography community, once his secondary source of income and validation, turned its back on him when the truth about his artistic endeavors became known. His blog defending himself became increasingly unhinged before finally going dark. The criminal investigation moved more slowly, but charges were eventually filed related to the drugging of students and financial fraud. Killian's lawyer negotiated a plea deal to avoid trial, which meant the victims wouldn't have to testify, but also meant a lighter sentence than many of us felt he deserved. Still, he would serve time and be required to register as a SX offender. Throughout all of this, Zara continued her pregnancy with remarkable strength. She transferred to a different college to complete her degree, choosing a school with a strong support system for single mothers. She changed her major from photography to social work, inspired by her experience to help other victims of exploitation and abuse. The other families and victims stayed in touch, forming an informal support network. We had monthly dinners where we could share our progress and challenges. Watching these young women reclaim their lives and futures was incredibly inspiring. Some returned to their artistic pursuits on their own terms. Others, like Zara, found new paths entirely. The way Margaret showed up with that laptop evidence is absolutely incredible. Killian kept detailed records of everything, and his own wife just handed them over to investigators. What a massive game changer, wow. As Zara's due date approached, she made the difficult decision to pursue full termination of Killian's parental rights. With the criminal conviction and extensive documentation of his predatory behavior, the family court judge agreed. Killian would have no legal claim to the child he had conceived through manipulation and abuse. The birth itself was both joyful and bittersweet. Zara delivered a healthy baby girl she named Hope. Holding my granddaughter for the first time, I felt a complex mix of emotions. This innocent child was born from trauma, but she also represented resilience and the possibility of healing. Zara looked at her daughter with fierce protectiveness and pure love. In the weeks following Hope's birth, our family settled into a new rhythm. Zara lived at home while attending classes online, and my wife and I helped with childcare. It wasn't the path any of us had envisioned for Zara's college years, but we made it work. The joy Hope brought to our lives helped balance the darkness of how she came to be. Killian made one last attempt to insert himself into our lives, sending a letter through his lawyer claiming he wanted to establish paternity and seek visitation rights. Our attorney shut it down quickly, citing the terminated parental rights and restraining order. It was his final defeat, the last gasp of a predator who had lost all power over his victims. 6 months after Hope's birth, Zara received an unexpected message. Vita, Killian's first known victim, reached out to congratulate her on the baby and share her own journey of healing. They began corresponding regularly, with Vita becoming a mentor figure for Zara. Their connection, born from shared trauma, evolved into genuine friendship and mutual support. support. The university implemented sweeping changes to prevent future exploitation. They established clear guidelines for faculty-student interactions, required training on appropriate boundaries, and created an independent oversight committee for mentorship programs. While it couldn't undo the harm done, it offered hope that future students would be better protected. As I write this, Hope is taking her first steps, toddling between furniture with determination that reminds me of her mother. Zara is preparing to graduate with honors, having transformed her pain into purpose. She's already been accepted to graduate programs in social work, with professors who recognize her unique insights into trauma and recovery. Our family bears scars from this experience, invisible but permanent. Trust comes harder now. We're more vigilant, perhaps sometimes to a fault, but we're also stronger, bound together by the fire we walked through. We learned that evil can hide behind respectable facades, but also that courage and truth can prevail when people stand together. Killian is serving his sentence in a minimum security facility, his academic career destroyed, his reputation in ruins. He lost everything he valued, his position, his power, his carefully crafted image. Meanwhile, his victims are rebuilding their lives, reclaiming their voices, and finding their own definitions of success and happiness. Sometimes I watch Zara with hope and marvel at her strength. She took the worst experience of her life and refused to let it define her. She chose healing over hatred, growth over bitterness. She's teaching her daughter to be strong and wise, to trust but verify, to know her worth and never let anyone diminish it. The camera that started this whole nightmare sits in our closet, unused but not discarded. Zara says she's not ready to touch it yet, but maybe someday. Maybe she'll reclaim photography on her own terms, or maybe she'll leave it in the past. Either way, it's her choice now, free from manipulation or coercion. Our story doesn't have a neat ending because life doesn't work that way. Healing isn't linear. Some days are harder than others, but each day, Zara gets up and faces the world with courage. Each day, hope grows and thrives, untouched by the shadow of her conception. Each day, we move forward together, a family forged stronger by adversity. The other families from our support network have their own ongoing journeys. Some of the young women have found love with partners who understand their past. Others are focused on careers and personal growth. All of them carry their experience, but none of them are defined by it. They are survivors, not victims, and their resilience continues to inspire me. Looking back at that day when Zara first came home with the expensive camera, I sometimes wish I had seen the signs sooner. But I've learned that predators like Killian are experts at manipulation, at hiding their true nature until it's too late. What matters is that when the truth came out, we acted. We stood up, spoke out, and refused to be silenced. This experience taught us that institutions will protect themselves unless forced to do otherwise. It taught us that predators rely on shame and silence to continue their abuse. But most importantly, it taught us that when people find the courage to speak truth to power, when families stand together, when victims become survivors who support each other, change is possible. Hope's laughter fills our house now, a sound of pure joy that seems to chase away the lingering shadows. Zara is planning her graduate school path, excited about a future where she can help others who have faced exploitation and abuse. My wife and I are learning to be grandparents, a role we didn't expect so soon, but have embraced fully. The investigation revealed that Killian had exploited at least 15 young women over his academic career, 15 lives disrupted, 15 families affected, but also 15 strong women who found their voices and refused to be silenced, 15 stories of survival and resilience, 15 reasons why speaking up matters, even when it's terrifying. As I finish writing this, Hope is napping in her playpen while Zara studies for her final exams. The house is peaceful, filled with the quiet contentment of a family that has weathered the storm. We don't talk about Killian much anymore. He's become irrelevant to our daily lives, a footnote in our larger story of love, strength, and survival. Our journey continues, one day at a time. Some days bring challenges, reminders of the trauma we've endured, but most days bring small joys, moments of growth, and the deep satisfaction of seeing Zara thrive despite everything she's been through. She's not just surviving, she's building a meaningful life filled with purpose and love. This is our story, messy and painful, but ultimately hopeful. It's a reminder that predators exist, but so do brave people willing to stop them. It's proof that families can survive the unthinkable and emerge stronger. Most of all, it's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of truth to overcome evil. Subscribe for more Requested Reads content. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Check out the page for more.